they assign you stuff and they expect you to do it, so that's weird for me. But it's good. It's been pretty good. A lot of reading, but it's good. Welcome out. I'm going to cover a few housekeeping stuff, and then I'll introduce myself. So first of all, we have some Bibles here. I'm going to put all of yours on the screen today, but if you find yourself in a position where you don't have a Bible and you'd like one, we can take care of that. Also, if you have a bulletin with a little card in it, I think they're red today. Oh, they're all colors, or red or orange. Red or orange card. The significance in the color is nothing. But if you have one of those cards, and I love that you got it out now, just go ahead and start getting on this now. If you have a pen, then you can use it to write with. And if you don't have one, someone around you does. So if you have a pen, look for those numbers on a pen. They don't look for you. Right? I understand that's how it goes. And you can write the name on that card, that'd be awesome. And there's two other things I'd love for you to write too. Is just as we get into the new year, we want to kind of know what people are hearing and how people are hearing it. So if you could do me a big favor, especially if it's your first time or if you've been here just a couple times, and even if you've done this already, if you could write down how you heard about New Life, that'd be great. Like, from my friend Sally, or from the sidewalk shop, or whatever, from, I don't know, the person that works at Fresh Express, whatever, I don't know, just however you heard, that'd be great. And then the last housekeeping announcement that I'm talking about with this thing is we're going to be doing a course called Course 101 coming up soon. So if you're new, you'll learn about this, as we're going through a series right now called Reasonable Faith. And basically what we're talking about is, reasons for why we believe what we believe. However, we are only going to cover 3 weeks of stuff, and we also don't want to talk for 2 hours, and you do not want us to talk for 2 hours. So we can only cover so many things. But Course 101 is going to be a more in-depth way to look at reasons behind what we believe and why we believe it. So if you are a believer and you think, I'd like to know some of that information, just for conversation in my own sake, you could write Course 101 down on the card. If you are B, maybe someone who doesn't identify as a believer, doesn't identify as part of the church, but you are interested in knowing why these crazy people believe what they believe, and if there's any good reason for it, I would highly recommend this to come. Or C, if you're some category that's not in there, you can still come. So write down Course 101 too. So we've got your name, how you heard about New Life, and Course 101, and we're done. Okay, great. Now, I am Caleb. I think that I've met almost all of you, at least once. But some of you maybe not. So I don't want to take for granted you all know my story, so I'll tell you a little bit about me so we know each other, and then it'll make it better when I talk. So here's the thing you should know about me, is raise your hand actually, if you identify as a student, I grew up in church. Okay, keep your hand up if you identify as I really grew up in church. I really grew up in church. Okay, alright, you can put your hand down. That's a lot of you, and I'm going to say that, alright, I can't make wages, but I'm just going to say, I just really, really grew up in church. Again, I'm not going to make a claim about me being like church kid out of all of us, but I'm telling you, I was like church in church. Okay, so I really, really grew up in church. And I think that is can be a good thing because I learned some really valuable things about faith from a young age and got to see people walk that out and lived in a community, and I had an awesome youth group. Also, let's be honest, I was practically a celebrity in my own church, and there are people in this room, at least one, who can identify and verify that information. But I remember we had these double doors in our sanctuary, and I used to just come in the morning and just and there were old ladies who sat in the back row, and I walked past, and we'd talk, and give them a hug, and kiss them, and they loved me, and I did these skits, and so people would identify me as the character. I played these skits sometimes. One time we did the Church's Search for Purpose, based on that purpose-driven life book, if you're familiar. If you're not, then you didn't grow up in church. So, we did these skits, and I was Ron, Search for Purpose, and I would walk in, and people were Ron. So it was just really something for me, because when I walked into the double doors of my high school, I didn't really get the same kind of response. So church was just great for me, for that reason. I'm telling you, I really, really grew up in church. There's some positives. There's some negatives, gets you inflated with the ego about yourself and my expectations. And also, just sometimes, there are like these unsaid rules of like church culture that we can get ingrained into us. And they are not always positive either. And I don't think they're things that people necessarily say out loud, but they're things that get translated just by attitudes and characteristics. So we're going to go into a segment that I would like to call hashtag grew up in church. Okay, we are now beginning hashtag grew up in church. So I'm an undergraduate, I'm a physical scientist, I hate it technically, but I do love science. And I will tell you that it was difficult. In fact, I was terrified to go into the science major from my hometown growing up church, because there's certain language that gets identified if you grew up in church about science community or about like people, especially about like people who don't believe in God, right? So I started to try to think, okay, if we could like write down what things are being not said that are kind of being said. And so I consulted my hashtag growth in church dictionary, and I found some definitions that I thought might help. So, for example, scientist, if you could put it up there. A scientist is a single connotation of statement to know your source truth of these people for the eternity of time. Alright, so now, did anyone say that during a church service? Maybe no. Some parts of it, yes. Single connotation part. Those are people who grew up in the 70s, by the way. They use that language, so. But anyways, like, if I took like a temperature of the faith community I grew up in regards to what scientists do, it would be something like this, okay? And so that's kind of the attitude that would impose me. Now, atheists is even better, so I thought if we could do my hashtag growth in church, a completely immoral human being who hates God, Jesus, Christian, charity, love, sunshine, butterfly. So that's what we about atheists. It was, well, the atheists would say, and then they would say something completely stupid that they just would never say. Like, it's just the way that they like phrase things, and we laugh at how dumb atheists are, and it's great, and we all have a great time. But when you get to the problem with these hashtag relevant church definitions and the culture that that's within you, is that when you go to college, for example, and you interact with people in a scientific community and people who identify as atheists, they're not that always. And then what do? So like for example, my junior year I lived with people who were completely different than me, two of which, but one really, really identified as atheist. He was just a super nice guy, and I didn't know anything. In fact, he's one of my roommates today and best friend. But he did not fall into this definition. So I think what can happen a lot is we can have these preconceived ideas of how to deal with science, how to deal with atheists, or any person who believes something else, and we run into someone who doesn't match up with that as challenging. We talked about that maybe like 4 weeks ago here. But I think it's kind of a bad way to go about preparing people to deal with other faiths and things like that, or the science community. So one other person we talked about a lot, we just throw up the cloud of man. Raise your hand if you know him. Raise your hand if you know of him. Okay, if you really, really grew up in church, then his name might have come up, there might have been like in the kitchen, like a picture of him, like with a dartboard, something like that, I don't know. So this is Richard Dawkins. He's considered one of like the 4 horsemen of the new atheist movement, which is not really that new anymore. But if you're on a close level with him, you might have heard of it, TikTok. That's how we relate. But he has this quote too, because this is something that you say, okay? Faith is the great cop-out. The greatest excuse to obey is when you can think and evaluate evidence. Faith is believed in spite of, even perhaps of, because of the lack of evidence. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that you usually represent, saying like people of faith are, they're stupid and all that. And then the Christian response to that is, well, people of science are stupid. And that's usually how we relate. But something that we are kind of, as a body of New Life, are trying to lead towards a new kind of paradigm of thinking about how we connect with these issues. And I think the problem that happens here is we're ignoring a large truth that everybody participates in something. Okay? So if we agree with that quote, then I think we're missing the point that Richard Dawkins did. He puts his faith in someone's truth, right? He is what Ian talked about this before, he's a naturalist, so he puts his faith in the fact that if you can't see it, if you can't measure it, if it can't be calculated into data, it does not exist. And you can't prove that. No one knows that. He, in fact, puts faith in something. But I think the way we grew up to believe about these people, we never even thought about that. We never thought about seeing people that way. They're just dumb, and then they see us as just dumb. So what we're trying to do as a body is think about everyone has faith. And so the best way for us to go about things is really not to tell people they're stupid or make insults, but to think about who really has a reasonable faith. Is there good reason for what you're going to say? So the first week, Andy spoke about the reasons for having faith and the fact that God exists. And I think did a really great job in covering that. And then last week, Ed talked about, is it reasonable to have faith that there's such a thing as objective morality, that there is truth out there that you can grab a hold of, and it's true for all people in all places and all times. And we talked about some good reasons to believe that. Now today, I get the really awesome job of getting to talk about Jesus. So is there reason for belief in Jesus? And is it good reason? Okay. So how we're going to cover that is I have like 3 bullets right there. There's 3 main bullets. I think it's on the back of your bullet. It's anybody call it bullet. But they are 3 ways that Christ is seen. And that's kind of the way, that's kind of angle we're going to go about presenting Jesus this morning, is really what makes him different than, other religious leaders, what makes him different from other ideologies, what makes him different from Santa Claus and so on like that, what makes him unique. So we're going to talk, 1, about his historical footprint. 2 is we're going to talk about his, what do I have written down? Indescribable personality. The reason I don't know that is because that first word took me forever. I knew personality and I couldn't see what to put there. And I was like, because we'll talk about it, this is so crazy. So I was like, indescribable. That sounds great. Okay, and then the third thing we're going to talk about is sacrificial salvation, or we call the gospel. And these are 3 things that I find to be pretty neat about Jesus. Okay, everybody on the same page? You know where we're going? You know where we're headed. Head not yet, head not yet. Yes. Okay, great. So, historical footprint, I'm going to break that down into 2 things. 1, first blank, historicity. Historicity. Okay, and if you don't know what historicity means, it sounds like I'm making up a word I pulled up from Dr. Seuss, but I really didn't. Historicity means, historical reliability. And the second thing we'll talk about is just his influence. Okay, so before we prove that Jesus has a unique historical footprint, we've got to talk about if there are good reasons to believe that he existed, and that he did what we say that he did, and that he was who we say that he was. Because there's a lot of debate out there. Okay. But the first thing we'll talk about is I'd like to bring in a mention about the gospel. So the gospel is referred to, name it. I believe you. All right, so the gospel refers to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we call these some 4 eyewitness testimonies. There's a lot of controversy about using that phrase, but 4 eyewitness testimonies written down about people who interacted with Jesus or people who talked to people who interacted with Jesus. Okay. And so I was in Brooklyn, New York this summer on an internship, which Andrew, you're going to head there tomorrow. I'm so excited about that. But it's a beautiful place. I got to talk to really cool people. And one guy I was talking to, a friend of mine, and we were having a conversation about whether you could believe the gospel or not. And there are some objections that we came up with, and they're pretty common objections. And they go something like this. Well, first of all, they were written down so much later than that thing actually happened that it's probably all messed up. And even if they weren't written down so much later, we've had so many translations passed around and talked about a span of 2,000 years, so there's no way we have what was actually written. And then even if we have what was actually written, there's no way to prove that those things actually happened. Okay? So the first 2, honestly, this isn't like a shot in the dark. There's really, really great evidence about the first 2. We'll talk about that. The third one, that's a real similar thing. So he said there's no way to prove that these things were written later. Okay, well that's a fact that's not true. Okay, that's it's easy to do it. But the Gospels were recorded sometime around between 60 at the earliest and 90, some say 100 for the book of John at the latest. So remember, Jesus was probably actually not born at 0, even though that's why I say it's 0. He was probably born at 4. So we're talking from a span of 20 years when they start seeing him come down. So that's people are still alive, they saw him. And Jesus wasn't a private life, where it's oh, I wrote about my grandma who lived her life, inside, I wrote about him in the different and just within her bedroom, and no one knows whether it's true or not. This is, sorry, it's not correct. I'm really sorry for that. I really, really apologize. I know someone not interested. But anyway, this is Jesus. He was out and about, right? Tons of crowds. If you're going to lie about somebody, it's really hard to lie about somebody and start telling those lies right, like less than a generation later. So either way, the fact that they weren't written later, that's a fact. Look it up. Please look it up. It's a fact. The second thing, though, they say, well, it's impossible to know we have what was originally written. Sure, they might have originally been written then, but they probably talked about Jesus as like a good guy and a teacher, and then over time he grew into crazy scholars. Okay. Well, a problem with that is that there are actually just a gigantic amount of what we call manuscripts about the Gospels, right? The super handwritten copies that people make. We have like a ton. So just Greek manuscripts, just language Greek, they have over 5,000 Gospels. And then you add in other languages, and we've got like over 20,000. Okay, I'm just telling you, that's like 20 times more manuscripts than the next like leading book that has a lot of copies about it. We have more copies of the Gospel, handwritten copies of the Gospel, than any other book ever comes close to how many we have. Okay. Now, do they all match up? Well, not exactly. Okay, so there are some errors between the two, between like all the different copies, as you might expect for 20,000 copies. But when you eliminate what we consider like scribal errors, or like misspelling and typos, then what they say is that they're probably about 99.5% the same. And with those 5,000 roots, they're already like 99% the same. And the like big problem ones are usually in your Bible that are going to be bracketed out. Like the very end of Mark will have a little bracket like, hey, some of the early ones don't contain it. Okay, so what you have in your hand, if you have a Bible, and you don't remember, you skip it again. What you have in your hand does not correct. You can be sure is the original, what was originally written. Now, is it English from Greek? Yeah, so is that going to, maybe. But that's pretty incredible, that we have, you can be sure to have it. So, that one really doesn't hold up in court either. But the last argument is, okay, so we have documents that were written early, not documents that were live to be able to say anything. And so we have documents that we have in our hands, what was originally written to. That doesn't mean that what was written actually happened. Okay, so that's the last kind of thing. That's the big holdup that people have. And I would say that there is plenty of good reason, if it's your faith, that what was written happened. Okay, so one thing is just the time limit of these events. We kind of already talked about that, but we're going to tell a lie about somebody who don't come to the public, right? So there's plenty of people out there to verify whether these things happen or not, and they're being spread around. The earliest copy of the gospel we have is a chunk of John from 120. And bear in mind, these things are written on papyrus, so these things don't like survive very well. But we do have like a chunk of John from 120 AD, which is funny because some people say John was written in like 110, 115, but it's kind of hard to believe that it would already start circulating around the world in 5 years, as like an authoritative word of God. But we have a chunk from 120. So we know that these things were talked about pretty much right after they happened. It's hard to believe that they're going to lie about something so public. The other thing is the genre is written as biographies. So people who are experts in historical literature at that time, they will tell you that there's no such. Some people say, well, maybe the gospel was written as historical fiction. But the truth is, there was no such thing as historical fiction. That's like an invention of like the last 1,000 years. So the genre is biography. That's just the way it goes. So someone could have like intentionally be lying, but that's about your own hope. And then another cool thing, I think, is just that Jesus has plenty of thoughts from historians, right? So Josephus is like a first century Jewish historian. He talks pretty openly about Jesus. In fact, he talks about like his death and resurrection. If you read up on it, people are going to say, oh, Christians wrote that in later. But everyone agrees that he definitely talked about Jesus as someone who existed. People disagree with what they don't believe in. Another guy that's pretty cool is Tacitus, and I think they have a quote from him. So he's a Roman historian. He writes in 116 AD, and he says, so this is like about the Great Fire in Rome. He says, consequently, you get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations called Christians by the populace. Christus, apparently what he went by at some time, or that is himself, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. And a most
devious superstition, thus check the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, but also for certain people, but even in Rome. Okay, so what we know from this guy is he's saying in 116, when he's writing about the history of what happened back then, there's definitely some guy named Christ. He was definitely crucified by Pontius Pilate, and some kind of crazy superstition, and this is a Roman writing again, which at this time they hated Christians. Okay? Some kind of crazy superstition broke out in Judea and spread the whole world. Okay? By the way, it's going. Okay, so that's one mention. There's another guy named Pliny, he wrote about it, and then one other person, the Talmud. If you're not familiar with that, it's sort of like a commentary on Jewish life and history and literature and the Bible. But there's a really cool quote from the 2nd century. It says, on the eve of Passover, Yeshu, which is how you say Jesus in Hebrew. Yeshua, but Jews refer to him as Yeshu to make the distinction. Yeshu was hanged. Also, crucifixion and hanging are synonyms. So now wait, there's a verse in the For 40 days before the execution took place, a herald cried, "He is going forth to be stoned because he has practiced sorcery and enticed Israel to apostasy." So, even historically, you can see a comment that says, well, he existed, he was accused of practicing sorcery, which one of the cool things about this is, so Jesus did miracles, right, in the gospel. If no one's saying he didn't do amazing things, they're just trying to say that it was sorcery instead. So no one's denying that. In fact, it's kind of proof that he did supernatural things. It's just that we're calling it sorcery instead. And he enticed Israel to apostasy. So those are some historical ones. I'm going to throw in one more quote, and then this is from an archaeologist from the last century, William Ramsey, historian from 1915. So this guy was not a believer at the beginning, I believe, but I think he became one. But he sought out to kind of check the claims of the author Luke, who wrote 2 books, Luke and Acts. Great. So he wrote Luke and Acts. So this guy set out to kind of check. Luke is a historian, like he just is. That's what he writes. And he documents place after place after place after location after location. And so this guy went over there to the places Luke talked about and just dug. He just dug where Luke said, and he went to see if something was there. And this is some of the conclusions he came to. He said, further studies show that the book could bear the most minute scrutiny as an authority for the facts of the Achaean world, and that it was written with such judgment, skill, art, and perception of truth as to be a model of historical statement. You may trust the words of Luke in a degree beyond any other historian, and they stand the keenest scrutiny and the hardest scrutiny. That's pretty cool, huh? So, archaeologically, these things fit in. If they say it was there, it was there. So, I think, in my opinion, there's pretty good evidence to believe. So every few years, like every 3 decades, probably every 30 years or so, a group of historians and people get together and they say, hey, let's get together and figure out who Jesus really was. And this happens a lot. The most recent one was called the Jesus Seminar. And what happens in these is usually Jesus ends up looking like whatever is culturally cool at the time being. But in the last few times that this has happened, people usually come up with some historical consensus about what we know happened. And so what we talk about there are 2 historical facts. Basically, no one can deny that Jesus was baptized, Jesus was crucified. Just from other writings, from things that and these are the most skeptical people in the world. Okay, they're sitting together about this. So 2 historical facts. He was baptized, he was crucified. And then there are 8 what they call probable facts, which is kind of not common stuff. And it says that we can be very, very almost certain, except for some very curious people, that he was baptized by John. He was a Galilean. He lived in a confined geography. He called disciples. There was a controversy going down in the temple. He was crucified by the Romans. His disciples carried on, and they were persecuted. So these are kind of, you can read this up a little bit too. These are kind of some of the things that they talk about. That we can, almost completely certain of. I said in my little footnote, if you want to read that a little. And this reader's opinion probably could translate, we are sure these things happen, we just don't want to upset the people with the dollar bills, y'all. Because if you're on for tenure and you start making statements about Jesus rising from the dead, good luck. You know what I'm saying? So that's just my opinion, alright, don't take that to the bank, that's totally from Caleb Cat. But what I just noticed is basically, if it happened and it has no consequence for us as humanity, for our morality, or makes a supernatural event, then we can be sure that it happened. And if it's supernatural or it's about the resurrection, probably didn't happen. All right, so make of that what you want. But I'll tell you this, even from calling these things facts, it is pretty crazy that we know that Jesus lived, we know that he taught them, we know that he made religious leaders pretty angry, we know that he was crucified, we know that his followers believe that he rose from the dead, and they died believing. They were killed, some of them in really, really terrible ways, like thrown into like boiling stuff and crucified upside down and cut into two. Like saying that they saw Jesus alive. They died. I don't know, make that what you want, but those things are enough, okay? So the other thing is just, if you can pull up that from 1 Corinthians, that passage as well. It's the Apostle Paul is another really thorn in the flesh for people who I think are looking to disprove things. Is that, like, we know he wrote this copy right here, like 20 years after Jesus died, and he's making really bold claims about, so for I delivered to you as the first important what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scripture, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and this is where it's pretty crazy, that he appeared to Cephas, which is Peter, and then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers. 500 people! He's saying that he appeared to more than 500 people at one time, most of whom are still alive. So some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James and to all the apostles, last of all, a long time the Lord appeared to me. He's writing this 30 years after Jesus resurrected, and he did. And he's saying, by the way, 500 people saw it. Okay? This was circulated by churches as fact. You think someone could have checked up on this? You don't just, if you're going to tell a bold lie, you don't say, oh, it happened 20 years ago, and 500 people saw it, many of them are still alive. That's a terrible way to tell a lie. So, I don't know, think about what you want to. I'm just saying that these things are facts. Okay? So can I give you an airtight example, like proof that Jesus existed, died, was resurrected? I can't. Okay? I can't do that for you. I can't say something that will convince you because they will put me on TV and we would all be one big happy church family. Okay? That doesn't happen. But I can tell you there's really, really, really good reason. Okay, so you have to check your mind to be part of the church. Okay, so the other part of historical footprint is so much faster than that part, don't worry. That was the longest part I found. The other part of historical footprint is influence, and that's just that he's a really influential person. Okay, so to say that he had a historical footprint, we have to prove that we have to talk about historicity, we have to talk about influence. So his influence still carries on today. All right, the movement still carries on today. People don't only are affected by his teachings, but they say that he speaks to them today. I would say that he speaks to me today. Many people in this room would say that he has changed our lives today. And that's all over the thinking world. You don't believe that he's influential? It's the year 2013 for a reason. What else? All like he is influential. Okay. And then the other thing is his name. Just go out and say it to people. Okay, see what happens. You never get like an average reaction to the name of Jesus. You can say lots of other names, but you say Jesus, and you're going to get something funky. All right. You say it to the wrong person, and it might go off on him. You say it to my papa, and he'll just start crying. So that's grandpa, by the way, Southern Ohio talk. You're not related. So the name, he's just an influential person. He has worldwide influence. So I would say he's unmatched in his story. The other thing is his unmatchable personality. And the two things we're going to talk about are self-claims and moral character. Okay? So Jesus is unique in all the claims he made about himself. He makes some, if you don't know, some crazy claims about himself. Alright? Let's just observe a few. The first one is Matthew 10:37-38. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take up their cross, an execution method, and not associated with his death because he hasn't died. Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. If you're following like a teacher, what do your teachers say? Let's just talk about that, right? What do you do if I said that? Hey, if you want to listen to my sermon and you want to be like me, then you need to love me more than your parents who gave birth to you. Insanity. Moving on. John 6:53. So Jesus said, truly, truly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man, this is what he called himself, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. What? All right, I'm going to talk about that one. You just know it sounds great. Moving on. Mark 2:38. 2, 5 through 7. When Jesus saw, okay, this is when there was a paralyzed guy, and they wanted to get to Jesus, but the room was completely crowded, so they broke open the roof. His friends broke open the roof, and they lowered this guy. Okay? When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." The scribes were sitting there, questioning in their hearts, "Why does this man speak like that? He is blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" In a extremely monotheistic religion that is so uptight about sticking to monotheism, to say that you have the authority to forgive the sins of another person is just as crazy as the other. Okay? So that's a big statement. In fact, they reacted to it that way. Another one. John 8, 56 through 59. Okay, so Jesus is talking, this is a battle of Pharisees and religious people. He says, "Your father Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad." And the Jews said to him, "You are not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham?" And Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." They took him to the throne, and Jesus stayed himself and went out of the temple. Two things. Imagine this being like Barack Obama. Okay? He's giving like a talk, and he says, "Hey, you know what? When George Washington saw that I was going to be elected, he was really excited about it." Okay? That's insanity. Alright, so that's about what we're looking at, except an even larger time span. Okay? So still like a founding father idea, saying that this guy actually saw you and was happy about it. And then two, if you're not familiar with the phrase, "I am," you don't go tossing that around. Alright? So in the song that we sang today, where we said the name of God, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, someone might pronounce it.
Yahweh.
Okay, I grew up in, I took like a Hebrew classes, and you don't want to say that name, but I'm trouble with it. It's more of an OCD than a religious thing. But regardless, that's what that translates to in some sense. I am and I will be. That's like the name of God. It's what he's saying in this passage. Before Abraham even existed, I am. He's saying like I'm God. And that's what he's saying, without a shadow of a doubt. So in fact, that was actually what he was killed for, was blasphemy. Okay, some comments about the temple, some comments about him being able to destroy it, raise it up for 3 days, comments making himself equal to God. He was accused of this, and he never denied it. He didn't deny it. Okay? So a lot of people like to say, "Oh, Jesus never claimed to be God except the book of John, but that is not reliable because it doesn't agree with what I think." But in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he never claimed to be God. Well, the problem is they crucified him and claimed to be God, and he never denied it. So this is a quote right here from this guy named G. Bernard Shaw, who was a skeptic, not a believer, but he definitely believes that Jesus stopped his death. And it's for this reason. Whether you believe with the evangelists that Christ could have rescued himself by a miracle, or as the modern secularists point out that he could have defended himself sexually, aka saying, "Oh, I'm not God, I don't believe that." The fact remains that according to all the narratives, he did not do so. The consensus on this point is important because it proves the absolute sincerity of Jesus' declaration that he was a God. No imposter would have accepted such a dreadful consequence without an effort to save himself. No imposter would have been nerved to endure them by the conviction that he would rise from the grave and live again after 3 days. Jesus absolutely claimed that he was God and that he would rise from the dead, no doubt about it. Okay? When we talk about these claims, there's an argument from C.S. Lewis called the liar, lord, lunatic, right? But it's really a lot better than this chapter, so I'm going to pop it up with you. Bear in mind the saying you just looked at. C.S. Lewis is a man who is merely a man and said this sort of thing, as Jesus said, would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level of the man who says that he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that option open to us. He did not. Could be from C.S. Lewis open here. Alright, so that's just the fact. He made these claims about himself. People believe it, so you can't go around saying this is a good fact. So the question is, alright, is he a crazy person? Is he a liar? How many of you guys have known someone that you would think, that person lies a lot? I probably wouldn't trust them, right? I know a lot of people lie, right? Okay, I've had a couple in my day. How many of you met someone, and I don't mean this in like a dehumanizing way or anything, but I know someone met someone with like mental illness, like they're kind of crazy, right? Okay. So, I mean, I've met some people on high and that's the way it goes. I'm not like making light, but I mean, I've talked to one guy for like an hour about how he leads like research trips to Antarctica and looked at like staging and how that really progressed here. So these people are out there. People are crazy. People are pathological liars. Now, for those of you who know that, how many of you ever sat down with them and said, "Hey, would you teach me how to live my life? Would you tell me some good things to follow?" No, they wouldn't do that because people who are pathological liars are saying, don't normally produce sound moral ethical truth. All right? But what we have from Jesus is the opposite of that. His moral character, which is the second point, is unparalleled. Right? It's insane. Look at some of his teachings, for example. Okay, I'm not going to look these up, but we'll talk about him. He said to love your neighbor as yourself. Right? He pulled that from the Old Testament. But then he gives the story of the Good Samaritan. If you're not familiar, ask me that in some time. But kind of saying that your neighbor is more than just the people you like, but they could be the people who culturally you are more different from than anyone else. He defined neighbor in a different way. He upped the law and said you're to love everyone, not just your friends, but your enemies. He said you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemies. But I tell you to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. That kind of stuff, we just don't hear that in the Bible. Okay? He talked about worry in a really cool way. You know, said, you guys have heard that, you know, don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow has enough trouble with its own, right? If you've ever heard that, that's agree with us. You know, like, and it just makes sense. We know that. We know that it makes really good sense. He talked about orphans and widows, right? And what does it look like to really be religious in a sense that we take care of those people. You know, we take care. He challenged people in the positions of power and worked for equality for those who are underrepresented. Things that we know today are still beautiful things. Stuff that crazy people don't know. And stuff that pathological liars, they aren't interested in. He has this dynamic of almost opposites that work together, right? So in a sense, he ups the moral expectation of humanity so high. He said, you know, you've heard that it was said don't commit murder, but I tell you, if you hold a grudge against your brother, that's the same. He just put morality so high that it seemed like no one could follow it, but yet he wasn't judgmental at all. He was called a friend of sinners because he had such grace for people who were on the margins of moral success. He was transcendent in a sense that people recognized him as other. He just didn't seem like any of us, and yet perfectly human at the same time. In a sense that he was more human than any of us could ever hope to be. There's something about you that's just so different and so good in its purest definition that you just can't say it's crazy. So those two things I think make up how you in his personality. And then the last thing, which is in my opinion of faith, is that his salvation is unique. And we're going to break this down into three things, and I'm shamelessly ripping this off from another author, so if you'd like to learn more about it, you can. But he's shamelessly ripping off the gospel. You guys know it. So we're going to talk about three things. The first one is what we're going to call the upside-down incarnation. Upside-down incarnation. The second one is we're going to call the inside-out sacrifice. And the third we're going to call the already not yet resurrection. And I'll read these two. Can you put the passage up in John 1? Okay, so the upside down incarnation, okay, this is something that's different. This is the passage we have in the book of John. It says, in the beginning was the Word. This is at the intro to Jesus' biography, you guys know the Word is coming. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. In the beginning was the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Okay? So in almost every line of thinking about God and man, almost every religious narrative, it's about us working our way up there. Do these things, get right, practice this, wear that, don't do that, drink this, don't eat that, and you'll get up there where we'll rise to the illusion. But the incarnation is upside down, and that in this instance, God comes down and absolutely us. Not so much about what we do, it's much more about what he has done. He bridges the gap, we don't have. The upside down information. Next is the inside out sacrifice. Okay, and this passage we already looked at, right? Christ died for our sins and quotes the scripture, buried, raised on the third day and from the okay. So inside out sacrifice is that we believe that in his sacrifice, in his crucifixion, right, because if he died and took on the sins of the world. Right? So what we had, our junk that stuff to separate us from God, he took that on himself. We don't have to. Okay? So what's different about this is we believe that your heart is actually changed from the inside out, because Jesus takes that where you need to faith. And so most other ways of thinking about how we should live are about modifying your behavior in a way to change you as a person. So what's sort of an outside-in approach, right? Religion is out here, and we'll work towards it. But in this one sense, we say we actually don't do much at all except to accept the sacrifice and put our trust in Jesus and what he's done. And then he gives us a new heart. And that salvation works its way from the inside out. And so our behavior is modified by this new life. Maybe that's how we got this. By this new life that he's given. Okay? So this inside out salvation. And then last, and this is a really cool one that's kind of hard to explain sometimes. Oh wait, no, I want to say something else about inside out, actually. Can I just tell you there's one place where we become totally broken and know that we were jacked up. And all that shame that you have about garbage in your life. It's the one place where you can come, put that on the table, and also at the same time receive grace and love. You can be totally vulnerable and totally loved inside. That really doesn't exist anywhere else. I'm just going to say this thing because I have to, all right? I was in this class for higher ed students there, and they were talking about a professor named Brene Brown. I don't know if you know her or not. She's a researcher, qualitative researcher. And she studies people who live whole lives. And she said there are two things that seem to be true about people who have whole lives. One is they're okay with vulnerability. They're okay with saying who they are. And two is they believe that they are loved. They believe that they are worthy. Now, what's the problem is if you're really vulnerable about all your junk, where can you find a place where you also believe that you're totally worthy and valued and accepted? And I'm just telling you, I don't know, no place like the cross when it comes to that. A place where we can come and be so vulnerable with all of the stuff that we're messed up with, and yet receive love and acceptance because he took on our junk and gives us the new life. Wholehearted people. I was like crying in the back row. I was like, but everybody else, wasn't it. I can tell you, now it's good. And the last thing is the idea that it's already, not yet, resurrection. And so what's really cool about this is, in this passage, and I would really encourage you to read 1 Corinthians 15, he goes on to talk about Jesus and his resurrection, that he was the first fruit of the resurrection. And so what we believe is that when Jesus rose from the dead, it's not only, he's alive, number one, which is sweet. You know, we have a relationship with a living Savior, not follow the teachings of a dead man. He's alive, but also his resurrection represents something. In this body, you'll hear sometimes we talk about the kingdom of God, but in the resurrection, Jesus started this new thing where God is reconciling the world back to himself. And Jesus is the first example of that. So we believe that we as a church, as the people who are involved in it, are living out the resurrection in that sense, that we live new lives and we're looking to make the world holy. But we know that in some sense it's already here. We already have a part in that work. But in the other sense, we know that it's not yet here. That it's something that Jesus is going to complete one day finally. So I think what's really cool about that is we're not passive. The resurrection makes us not passive people, but active people. We don't sit and say, well, the whole world's going to hell in a handbasket, so I might as well just sit here and read the Bible. We know because of the resurrection, we have a work to do. We have a work to do on a chance to bring life to people. And that is most importantly, I think, sharing the gospel, but also working towards what life is, what Jesus showed us what life is, taking care of widows, orphans, living out in a way we love people. We're not passive people, but yet also we don't have to be overwhelmed, and we're not arrogant thinking that we can change the world or realize that that's something Jesus is going to complete. He is going to fully complete one day. We're just in the middle of it, already not yet reality. So those are three things that are really unique about salvation, I think, that just make sense to me. So in all that, what I'd like to leave you with I think what we wrap it up well is that this gospel, these three things right here, are really where it's at. That's like the bread of life. In the sense that I can give you some good reasons to believe and tell you why, like I don't feel like I'm an idiot that I follow Jesus. But all the knowledge in the world, all the knowledge in the world, and it's not faith. And it's not trust. And faith and trust are kind of good words to go back and forth. And that's what a relationship with God looks like, is trusting Him. Because the gospel is what gives us experience. If you ask people that know Jesus in here why they believe in Him, we can tell you some interesting facts to say why we don't believe in other things. But why we really love Jesus isn't because of some story or some quote, but it's because He wrecked our lives. He just ruined our lives and gave us new and better life. And unless we experience that, we ain't gonna know. So in that sense, I think that's why faith is really, we say it's so essential. It's the key in it's putting faith into Jesus. So I can't tell you to do that if you're not in a place where you're ready. But what I would say is, will you consider that these claims might be Christian? And will you spend time in and around our community and connect with people who feel this way and who live this life out and just see there's anything to it? And that looks like, FYI, more than just Sunday service. It gets plugged into one of our community groups, making friends with some of these people. We really love people. We're not going to bother with that. And just see if there's any truth in that. But you're not going to find it on Wikipedia as much as you're going to find it in the lives of parts of the community of people that you live with. So that's what I'm going to leave with. I'm going to pray and we're going to have a song. Thank you. Lord, thank you that you're so different. Thank you that you offer us a way to be and live and love in a world that is so different. Thank you that you came for us. And we were never good enough to do you. Thank you that you changed us when we were never strong enough to change ourselves. And thank you that you're going to come and make things right. And in the meantime, Lord, help us to live in a way that reflects who you are. I ask all of you.